Welcome to the All People podcast, where we talk all people all the time. I'm your host, Elisa Southall. My goal is to improve candidate and employee experiences as well as company cultures throughout U.S. employers. We do this by leading with empathy, diversity, inclusion, equality, teamwork, and transparency. Come on this journey with me. Welcome back to the All People podcast, where we talk all people all the time. I am your host, Elisa Southall, and I am here with Sarah Blankenship. Sarah is the mind behind Gen X Nation. Thank you for being here, Sarah.
Thank you for having me, Elisa.
So tell us a little bit about Gen X Nation. What is Gen X Nation? Why did you start it? Right. Give us a little bit of insight.
Boy, I never know how to answer that question. I just laugh. So Gen X Nation, how did it get started? That I guess is the real question. I did not start out to become this unofficial mouthpiece for all things Generation X. I had read an article. I was lying in bed one night, read an article about Gen Xers, which if you even read anything about Gen Xers, it's normally not flattering. Usually we're just kind of overlooked because, we're labeled as the forgotten generation. And so I read this article that was basically just talking about how irrelevant we were and we're over and, we're basically worthless in the workplace, just all these negative things. And so me being very typical Generation X, I did not like hearing that. And so the next day, I rattled off a post on LinkedIn about all the reasons why Gen X is amazing. Not that I'm biased or anything, right? All the reasons that Generation X is amazing and why we are not irrelevant, we are not forgotten. And so almost instantaneously, this post went viral, and LinkedIn picked it up several different ways, and then BuzzFeed reached out to me, and so the response from my fellow Gen Xers was overwhelming. I had literally hundreds of Gen Xers reaching out to me who were like, I want to join your mission. I want to join your group. And I'm like, what mission? What group? Like, all I did was just like vent about how mad I was that, there was shade being thrown at my awesome generation. Right. And so I started looking on LinkedIn for groups that were, specific to Generation X. And there was almost nothing out there. Millennials, you all have got it covered. Like, I mean, there's probably thousands of millennial groups out there, right? And because your voice is very loud, very strong. And for Generation X, there was just crickets. I mean, there were a small handful of groups that were out there, but almost no engagement. And so I think it was probably last June, last July that I decided to just start a group and just see what happened. And the response has just been incredible. I mean, I talk to Gen Xers all day, every day, and the stories that I hear, the people that I get to connect with is incredible. And so here we are, with the small but very quickly growing group on LinkedIn. The engagement is off the charts. The daily engagement is crazy. I think the average group member comes back, 3 to 4 times a day to the group, which is very high engagement, and it's been a really exciting and awesome surprise that I just kind of fell into this by simply running my mouth, which I'm really good at.
You were taking a little tip from us millennials who like to air stuff on social media because that's what we're used to, right?
Right. And the thing that, well, okay, don't get me started because this is like so in my alley is that, Generation X, you all have had social media. You have had so many outlets from the get-go, from your teen years, especially through your early adulthood, where the only outlets that generation really truly had was our culture, our music, our movies, our clothes. It's not that we didn't have a voice. We definitely had a voice, but we just did not have the social media outlets like your generation did. So that's something that I think is very important to note about our generation.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I will say, Sarah and I speak once a week, right? We sort of found each other, and now we're just like, we have to be talking to each other at least once a week, or else it just feels like our lives are empty.
That's right.
But part of that is, you understand sort of millennials, right? I'm a millennial. Everybody knows that. We get shade thrown at us a lot, right? Because millennials are awful and we're the worst thing to happen to the workplace and whatever else. And so we talk a lot about that because, Generation X gets a lot of shade too. And one of the things, you and I were talking about doing some collabs, and I was actually surprised when I went out and I started looking at Generation X, and I was trying to find an article that said, what are the traits of Generation X? And it was like, there wasn't anything I could find. There's no article written about Generation X. It's just like, and as you said to me, you're like, they're the forgotten generation, right? Nobody remembers Generation X. And so tell me a little bit about those traits. What do they look like in terms of, sort of typical Generation X traits?
Yeah, I remember the day that we we Googled what the traits were between Generation X and millennials. And it's funny because when we did that search, there were like dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of not very flattering things about millennials. I want to get this straight right now. I am not a millennial hater. I am team millennial all day long. Some of my favorite coworkers ever have been millennials. I'm a big believer in bridging the gap between generations. And so I thought it was so funny. I remember us laughing when we were looking up the differences between Gen Xers and millennials, about the only thing that I can remember seeing about Generation X was that we're independent, we were the latchkey kids, we're dependable, we're steady, we're loyal, and that was pretty much it. You're like, that's it. That's all that there is about you all. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's really good stuff, but yeah, I mean, they just don't talk about us because, again, we don't have the collective voice like millennials have. We just don't. And it's interesting to see that voice getting louder and louder. Like, for example, if you're on TikTok, there are some voices of Generation X on there that have gained, I mean, considerable ground, even just since COVID, that are really causing Generation X to be heard and to be seen in a way that we just have not been in the past. Because one of our traits that we are known for, especially when it comes to the workplace, is that we just put our heads down, we do our job, we do what we're told, and we don't question it. Because respecting our elders and listening to authority, that is something that's very near and dear to most Generation Xers hearts. I mean, that's how we were raised, respect your grandparents, respect your elders. And so what we're finding is a lot of the good traits that we have as a generation, that we're loyal, we're dependable to a fault, I think a lot of us are finding now, has not really done us any favors in the workplace. Because what we've seen is a lot of Generation Xers, which Gen X, just to clear that up, Generation X was born between 1965 and 1980. We also have what is called a micro generation, which are Zennials, which were born, depending on which study that you find, it's going to be around 1977 to 1983, 84-ish. So I'm 1977 model, and I'm right at the beginning of that Zennial generation. And so the Zennial micro generation, we are kind of the crossover generation that we can relate really well to millennials. We can relate equally well to Gen Xers. But what we're finding is that too many of Generation X have done exactly just what I said earlier, is we put our head downs, we worked, we did jobs that told us to do. You have Bob out here, whose grandfather and, great grandfather, like 2-3 generations back, they've been accountants. And all right, when it comes time to go to college, what did he do? He just accounting, because that's what everyone else has done. And there wasn't a question of, hey, I don't even like accounting. Like, I want to be a scuba diving instructor, or, whatever it is that Bob wanted to do instead. And now, in our 40s and 50s, a lot of Gen Xers are waking up and realizing, I'm not doing what I was meant to do, or what I wanted to do, or that they're just now realizing that they have the opportunity to just, they have the choice, they have the opportunity to decide. And so all of the good qualities that we have kind of bit us in the butt as a generation, because where millennials invented, the term job hopping, which I don't know that that's the right word, but, aggressively growing in their career and climbing the corporate ladder very quickly, not staying in a job for more than a year or two at a time so that you could quickly advance to management. Gen Xers, even just 5 years ago would never have dreamed of that. Like, I've been at my job for 10 or 15 years, why would I leave? Even though they're underpaid, they're undervalued, there's no career path, I can't even say it, clear career path for where they could go moving forward in their career. But again, they just kind of sat back and shut up and did what they were told, because that's what was expected of our generation. So I find that our best traits are also traits that have held us back, unfortunately, in the workplace.
Yeah, and I can certainly see that. And I will say, even from an HR perspective, right? We often hear, even like I said, in HR, we often hear, oh, it's baby boomers and millennials, and it's like, but there's a group in between that nobody's even acknowledging, like that they're in existence. And so I was talking about how the baby boomer is just like the millennials and vice versa. And, as you mentioned, you're a millennial ally, right? You're in a millennial camp all the way. You totally agree. But part of what you and I like to talk about is the fact that the generations, they bring a lot of strengths to each other. You talked about us with social media. And those baby boomers have a lot of the historical knowledge and data that come with being in roles. And so how do you feel like Gen X works into that sort of strength base?
In what way? In working with the younger generations? Is that what
Well,
you're
in general,
saying?
so like there are strengths and obviously strengths and weaknesses of all the generations, but when you look at what the Gen X brings to the table, right, that they can help millennials with, or that they can maybe help baby boomers with, right, what do you see those as?
Well, I think that the number one, not I would say, like, one of the top traits of being Generation X and what we stand for is we are adaptable. I mean, we were latchkey kids. A lot of us, I mean, myself included. I would be off the bus at 4 o'clock. My mom didn't get home until 4 or 5:30, and I was expected to see my younger siblings off the bus to do laundry, to get dinner started, and from a young age, from like 12, 13 years old. We are very adaptable. We are almost experts at disaster management, because who knows what's going to happen whenever you're home at a young age like that. What could unfold with younger siblings? They fall, they get hurt. And back then we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have texting or anything like that. I mean, we had parents that we might not even be able to get in touch with, and we were responsible for taking care of our family. And so one of the major benefits to Generation X in the workplace is that we can think on our feet. We can adapt very quickly. I mean, we grew up in the era where, I can still very clearly remember our first family computer and, dial up internet. For those of you who don't know what that is, like, oh my gosh, stone ages in technology. I mean, I remember the first time my mom and I planned a family vacation on the internet. We would run over to the computer and we would type in a search for, whatever it was we were looking for, and then have to leave the room and come back 10 minutes later to see if the page had loaded, and that was what our technology was. And so patience, I mean, we definitely learned patience where, Gen Z and millennials have that very technological, like, what is it I'm trying to say, mindset of just like instant gratification. We want it right now. Well, we didn't have that growing up. I mean, it was a much slower way of life, which makes me sound like I'm like 80 years old, but it's true, and we were not completely connected. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. We could leave for the entire day as children and be gone for 10, 12 hours playing with our friends, and our parents were like, come home when the street lights come on. So we were fiercely independent. And I think that that translates really well into the workplace, that, we don't need a lot of direction. It also is can be a negative because we're independent to a fault. Micromanagers, me as a generation, member of Generation X, do not micromanage me. I can't handle it. And a lot of Gen Xers feel that same way. Like, we can figure it out. Technology, adopting new technology, we'll figure it out because we haven't always had it. We've straddled the lines between no technology, really. I mean, minimal technology when you think about the true technological age. And then also having to learn all that technology. And so we're very adaptable in the workplace. And, I see that as there's just so many benefits to Gen Xers. Not throwing shade at the other generations, but I mean, it's something that I'm very passionate about speaking to, because the fact that some of us Gen Xers are sliding in towards 60 years old, age discrimination, even though it's technically illegal, it is very much alive and well, unfortunately, especially for us Gen Xers. I mean, and that makes me so sad, because some of the brightest minds that I know we're not ready to just roll over and crawl into a hole because we're considered old, right? I mean, we are still ready to kill it in this, maybe final third of our book that we're writing for our careers. We're not ready to quit. We're not ready to give up. And so many people as Gen Xers struggle to find roles at this point in our life because, employers look at our resumes and think, oh, we had too much experience, or we'll want too much money, or, too much this, or, oh, they're too old, so they couldn't possibly adopt the technology that we would need them to adopt, when I don't think it can be further from the truth. So that's.
Yeah, and even to your point, Sarah, I mean, I've even heard it be, well, they're going to want to retire in 3 years. So why are we going to waste the time to train them and
yes.
put them through,
Yes, which really that opens up like a, completely other topic, is that so I had my first job when I was 10 years old. I was a babysitter, and I moved out of the house when I was 18 years old. I was working full time while I was in high school. I mean, I have worked my entire life. I mean, as soon as I could work and earn a wage at 10 years old, I had to be earning money. And when you talk to other Gen Xers, it is definitely a common theme that you hear. We've always worked. We've always made money. We've always been resourceful. And when the topic of retirement gets brought up, I question whether or not Generation X will ever truly be able to retire, because so many of us that are currently working full time, we have side hustles. Some of us have multiple side hustles, and we don't know how to sit still and just relax, because that was not really an option for us. We worked and worked and worked all the time, and so it's kind of like a hobby of ours. We love it. It's a big part of our identities that we were hard workers and driven in the workplace, and so many people counted on us and relied on us. We didn't want to let people down. And so that has translated into a lot of us that, even though they are like the older millennials, older Gen Xers that are heading towards retirement, the ones I've spoken to, they're like, no, I will not be retiring. Like, I may retire from this job, but then I will be starting, my next career, because we just don't know how to just sit down and not work. It's just so deeply ingrained in us that I don't know. I can't wait for the numbers to start coming in when we do reach retirement age, how many of us are going to be starting the next chapter in our careers. It's going to be fascinating to me to see how that unfolds.
Well, and I'll even say, that's an example of sort of how our culture and our society is coming in too, because baby boomers, we're in the point in our world where we're at 5 generations in the workforce. I imagine we're going to get to 6 generations in the workforce before too long here. And that's because financially we can't retire when we used to be able to retire.
True.
So that's a piece of it. But then I think, like you said, your generation, even my generation, we're like, we need to be in 100 projects, right? So like, we're like, we need to be this and this and starting up. And so we're always going to be, working, even if we're supposed to be retired, right? So I think that that's going to continue to be the way it works.
I agree with that point. And the thing about it though, Generation X, I mean, yes, every generation has like their major societal events that we've all lived through. And millennials, especially the older millennials and younger Gen Xers, we survived a lot of the same stuff, but in different ways. I mean, in 2008, my ex-husband was in the mortgage industry, and we went from making the most money we'd ever made to $0 almost overnight. I mean, because he was 100% on commission. So we have survived so many recessions, and not just that, but we were really the last generation who held out any hope of receiving a pension. When a lot of Gen Xers began their careers, we were basically given the promise that we would have pensions, right? And as we moved into maybe a decade or so into our careers, a lot of Gen Xers are realizing, yeah, those pensions are gone. The pensions that I was promised, they're gone, or they're next to nothing. And so where they could have been saving 401ks, and other retirement options throughout their career, I mean, a lot of Gen Xers have had to completely start from scratch, mid-career and starting to save for their retirement. And the biggest threat to Gen Xers, in my opinion, is that you're talking about 6 generations getting ready to potentially be in the workplace at the same time, which I think you're spot on with that. But for Generation X, one of the scariest things is that, Gen X, we are still scrambling to catch up from all of the times that we have been, hit down by these, major hits to the economy. You pair that with the fact that in a lot of cases, Gen Xers are simultaneously taking care of older boomer parents that are already facing major health problems, or even in my case, helping to take care of my, almost 90-year-old grandmother, and then partner that with adult children that are living at home that a lot of us are still helping to care for, and even potentially grandchildren that we are taking care of. And all of this is falling on our shoulders while we are struggling to finish strong in our careers. And we have so many obstacles that are trying to just knock us down and not allow us to finish successfully, in this portion of our career.
I totally agree. And one of the things I think is really unique about you, Sarah, is that not only are you an advocate for Gen X, you talk openly about this community that you've built, and you're trying to get people to come into that community and help individuals in that community, but you've also spent some significant time career coaching for Gen X. Why do you feel like that specialty is necessary? How are you helping those individuals in the Gen X community stand out in a different way?
Well, that is another thing that I more or less fell into by accident. I lived in the world of recruiting for about 4 years, and even though I left recruiting, I always joke that you can leave recruiting, but it's never going to leave you, right? Because if a friend of a friend of a friend knows that you can do interview prep or, resume writing, like you're always going to be the person that they turn to, right? And so I've always done career coaching on the side, since I left recruiting, and just something I'm very passionate about anyway. Well, in the past year or so, I started seeing these common themes within all of the job seekers. A lot of them had been at the same job for a long time. They were grossly underpaid. I mean, sometimes by as much as 100 to 150%, because they had been in the same job for so long. And one of the, like we talked about earlier, the good traits of Generation X is that we're loyal, but a lot of Gen Xers are realizing they're loyal to a fault. And so that definitely has carried over into their jobs. They stay at employers that undervalue them, that don't pay them what they're worth. They don't have a clear career path. And so a lot of the Gen Xers that I speak to are realizing that they're not making what they're worth. They are ready to change. But then they're terrified at the thought of changing because they don't want to be disloyal to their employers. And so, I've really partnered with a lot of Gen Xers to help them to see that there's nothing wrong with getting what you're worth in your career. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's, in fact, when you're heading towards retirement, you should be getting as aggressive as possible about earning as much money as possible, because if you don't earn it now, you're never going to earn it, right? And for those that do want to retire, I mean, they definitely have a lot of lost retirement to shore up because of the economic challenges that we face as a generation. And so as I talked to more and more of these job seekers, I realized that that was where my true passion was, in helping Gen Xers. I mean, not that I don't work with other clients, but I love working with Gen Xers because I understand exactly where their mindset is. I understand where they're coming from. And, the thing that I find fascinating, one of the things I find fascinating about Gen Xers is that they are, as a generation, a good majority of us struggle to talk about our strengths, and they don't want to be perceived as bragging. They don't want to, seem like a raging egomaniac, when they talk about their accomplishments in the workplace, and they really downplay their accomplishments to their own detriment. And so, I mean, it is sometimes like pulling teeth to get those things out of Gen X candidates. And so for me to be someone who can help, my fellow Gen Xer understand that, you need to own your accomplishments. You need to own your achievements. It's okay that you are successful. Go after the money that you deserve and that you need for you and your family. There's nothing wrong with that. Because it can be a very challenging mindset to overcome for a lot of Gen Xers, because we just, again, we're raised to just put our heads down, do what we're told, and just do our job. And it's not working for a lot of us. And so they're struggling with how do I change that? And should I change it? How and should, I change that? Those are the two biggest questions that I get, I think, from Gen X job seekers.
Awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, Sarah, too, about that pay increase, right? So when you were talking about somebody staying in the role for a long time, from an HR recruiter perspective, I can tell you when we did pay banding, right? You're getting, here's the range that you might make for this position, right? It's a bottom and a top number, and you're going to get a pay increase every year, roughly 3 to 5%, maybe, that you're going to get every year. And as soon as you get to that top end of their range, unless you get promoted, there's a lot of companies that'll say you can't make it anymore, right? They sort of say like, this is the max you can earn. Right. And so, I mean, I've even had it where people can't make anymore. So their company is telling them, oh, well, I only could give you these numbers because if I give you higher numbers, then you can't earn more, right? And so rather than those maybe Gen X people understanding, hey, I could go out and go get a new job and probably make 10 grand more than I'm making now, right? Because my skills warrant that, versus having that mindset of loyalty that they're used to from maybe that boomer generation.
It's true. I mean, and I've seen it firsthand. I mean, there was a client that I worked with that had been in the same job for about 10 years, and his boss was probably about 15 years away from retirement. So he was not going to get a promotion until his boss retired, and which is going to be quite some time from now. And so he realized, when we started doing market research, he was making around $75,000 a year, and he was capped at his income. He was just getting 3% standard, 3% annual raises. He was not going to get promoted for 15 years. He was like, and I don't even think I want that job, even if they offer it to me anyway. So what the heck do I do? And so over the course of a 2-year period of time, he went from 70,000 to, I think he's at almost $140,000. He's moved jobs twice, and has realized just how grossly underpaid he was, and not even just underpaid, but not gaining valuable upskilling that he needed for his career because he was in IT. And so, once he realized just how underskilled he was compared to his peers out in the workforce, he was, realized quickly that he needed to make up a lot of ground. And he's done that and consistently moved up in his salary and in his skill sets. And I've helped to coach a lot of Gen Xers do that very thing because, you just don't realize sometimes how undervalued you are when you're just accepting status quo at 3% salary increases. And right now in today's market, a lot of companies aren't even giving that. I mean, if they're giving it, it could be less than 1%, which isn't even keeping up with inflation. So, I mean, there are a lot of factors that, we should all consider in determining whether or not we should stay at our jobs. And I'm a big believer in doing an annual career audit. January, the first quarter of every year, everyone should be doing a career audit. Do market research. How much are your counterparts being paid? What is your career path that you have in front, offered in front of you? When could you potentially receive your next promotion? How likely is it you're going to receive that? What major accomplishments have you had in the previous year? What skills have you gained? And to really get real with yourself, are you getting paid enough? Are you in the right place? And, are you stagnating? Because especially if you're a Gen Xer, if the answers are yes to those questions, like you are stagnating, you are being underpaid, you are underskilled, undervalued, I mean, you're not doing yourself any favors or your family any favors by staying at a job where you're not going to be at your max earning potential. And unless you're lucky enough to have a spouse who makes a lot of money, or, you win the lottery or whatever, and money is not really, it's not really a big factor in your life, great, you're one of the lucky ones. But otherwise, if you're actively trying to save for retirement or potentially helping to take care of aging boomer parents or, younger, the younger generation, your adult children, or even potentially grandchildren, then earning is extremely important for those individuals. And so having a yearly career audit is crucial in knowing what next steps you should be taking within your career.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody say that, and I love that idea. So I encourage all of our job seekers to do that. One of the things I'll add to that from your standpoint of like looking up your salary, I mean, you can look them up on salary.com, you can use indeed.com, right? But a lot of employers will be like, oh, well, this is not factual because these are individuals reporting their income, right? So I enlighten people into a resource that HR and companies use. HR people are probably going to hate me for this, but BLS.gov, it's Bureau of Labor
Yes.
Statistics.gov.
Yes.
And the reason why I bring that up is because that's what companies use to benchmark.
That's
So
right.
generally how that is there's a title and we have to match it 75% of the time or greater, right? And then that gives you the pay range, not only by a particular title, but also by geographic regions. And then also it gives you percentiles and hourly rates and annualized, and then it also adds in benefits and other, commissions and bonuses and things like that of people in those similar titles. And so I always tell people use BLS.gov, because if you're going and using this as a counteroffer, if you're going to negotiate a salary, you can literally say, this is what you and your competitors are reporting. Like, this is legitimate fact, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a government website provided by the DOL, Department of Labor. So there's no way that they can tell you it's not factual.
Yes, that is a great point, because that is also what I use. Because, like you said, especially if you go to your current employer and you show, the statistics of what other companies are paying, especially if there's a large discrepancy in what you're making versus what you should be making, they're going to find every way that they possibly can, the majority of the time, to not pay you what you're worth. And it's sad but true that the best way, here we are in current job market, the best way to get the raise that you probably deserve is by changing employers. And it's sad that that's the way that it has to be, that employers just, they don't factor in valuation of employees like they used to 20, 30, 40 plus years ago. I mean, it's how can we stay as lean as possible? How can we find someone that is in an entry-level role or for an entry-level role that has 10 years of experience, right? I mean, we've all seen those job ads and we all hate them, but that's the mindset that these companies have adopted, which is just a joke that no, someone who is in an entry-level position should have no experience, maybe a year experience, not 10 years of experience. And then they list all the different, data points of what type of exact experience you should have for this entry level position. Like that's a huge pet peeve of mine. So yes, the bls.org website is a great tool to use if you are going to do that audit and determine whether or not you're getting paid what you deserve.
Yeah, so check out bls.gov. On the flip side, I wanted to talk with you. So we've talked a lot about what job seekers can do and how they can make some changes with that career audit. But if I'm an employer or a leader or a CEO in my organization, what can I do better to make Gen X feel comfortable or to help them grow in a way that maybe I haven't been thinking about?
I think people make it a lot more complicated than it should be. I think employee engagement in general is overcomplicated to like the nth degree, because what people want to be happy. I mean, this is like the genius idea of the sensory. Okay, so brace yourself. Ask people what they want. Ask them what they want. I mean, oh my gosh, it's like the big idea, right? Like
what a concept. It's like
what a concept. Ask people what they want. I mean, it's not rocket science. It shouldn't be. People overcomplicate it to a point that it's just kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, I know you see it every day, but I think the thing from a Gen X standpoint is don't discount us as candidates because of preconceived ideas of what you think that we would want. Okay. If you see someone who's been in a director level role and wants to take a manager level role, or even just, a contributor level role, don't discount that and think, oh, well, their salary expectations are going to be, just way too high. I'm not even going to mess with that. There is, our Gen Xers who are at that point where we've been in manager roles or director level roles for so long that we're just ready to just be an individual contributor, not worry about managing teams and talking to executive members all day long. We just want to be a contributor and do a really great job, for maybe the next 10 years. So don't discount if people are wanting to go down a few steps in their career, because, they still can be fantastic employees that aren't going to be, on this ego trip because they've been in director level roles. Not everyone wants that anymore. And then also the other thing that I've seen a lot with Gen Xers in the job market is there's so many of us who are navigating career pivots. Unfortunately, because of the state of our nation, teachers are absolutely flocking away from education, K-12 education, and also higher education, unfortunately, in numbers that we have never seen before, because they're, grossly underpaid and undervalued and mistreated and bullied and, all the other stories that you hear all day for teachers. But, give people a chance, because, for me, when I went through a divorce and, had been a stay-at-home mom for a while and went to re-enter the workplace, I was told that I would be lucky if I could get a $12 an hour receptionist role. And, that was where it was like, hold my beer and watch me, because that's not going to work for me. Right. And that is the one thing about Generation X, is that we can do just about anything given the opportunity, so if you see someone who's pivoting from teaching and they were successful, in their teaching career, give them a chance. And again, they're too to make a move, or, it's that all they've ever, how are they going to be a customer success manager in tech? Or how are they going to do a BDR role in tech? I mean, teachers, let me tell you, if anyone can multitask, it is teachers, right? I mean, what they have to go through in their 8 hours a day is is absolutely unimaginable for a lot of us. And so, don't discount Gen Xers that are looking to career pivot. So I would say those are the two big things, is just don't be afraid to ask questions. If they apply for a role and you have questions, another novel idea here, ask questions, get to understand them as a candidate, because you could be overlooking some of the best, most dedicated and loyal and high performing talent out there. Because one thing that is very notable about Gen Xers is a good majority of us are extremely high performers. We're some of the highest performers in the job market, because we give 110% with everything that we do, a lot of us. And so you're really overlooking some of the best candidates that are out there if you're not going to think about, bringing Gen Xers into your career pool or your candidate pool.
Mm. Yeah. I like that. You're talking a lot about transferable skills, and no matter what generation you're looking at, I think particularly Gen X, but no matter what generation you're looking at, companies lack the ability to say, we're hiring you for your transferable skills, right? We're looking for you to match these bullet points, every single one of them. It's like, no, that's not how this works, right? Take their transferable skills. When you're talking about stay-at-home moms, I love helping stay-at-home moms career pivot, because it's like, what, like, people think stay-at-home moms are just like, oh, I'm sitting at home doing nothing. No, like, they manage schedules and they have to pick up their kids, and how many calendars do they have? If you have children, like, you probably have 100 calendars you're managing, right?
Yeah, that's right. I do.
You're the CEO of your whole family, and so people don't give that enough credit about what those transferable skills from being a stay-at-home mom can bring to an organization. So I think that's great. One of the things I also wanted to sort of do as a joke, and we've talked a little bit about this, but
I can't wait.
so 2 episodes ago, Emily Marash was on, and we were talking about the thing that I can't stand, which is when everybody's like, oh, millennials just want a trophy, right? And I'm like, okay, but who gave them the trophy? Like, who gave them that trophy? That was the Gen X and the baby boomers gave us the trophy. We didn't give ourselves a trophy. And so I joke about that a lot, because it's like, your generation, right, wanted to have that trophy participation mindset, right? So you guys gave it to us, but then the baby boomers are mad at us for getting it.
I love this topic, and I think that it is a classic case of good intentions going horribly wrong, because we wanted the trophies. Like, we wanted the Latchkey Kid of the Year award, the Sibling of the Year award, whatever. Like, we wanted those things. And our boomer parents, I'm not going to sit here and have a boomer bashing, fest, because clearly my parents were boomers. But the thing that we have to understand about boomers and boomers, you're right, boomers and millennials, like, you're always talked about. We're never talked about. Gen X just kind of glossed over, like, Gen X, who's that? But boomers, I look at my mom, who, when I was in 7th grade, she entered the workplace. When my brothers were old enough to be in school full time, she began working a full-time job. And as a full-time working parent myself, after doing that for years now, I think, how hard must that have been for her to re-enter the workforce? We didn't have Instacart. We didn't have Uber Eats or DoorDash or any of this stuff. We didn't have, like, my family would not eat if it were not for Instacart. We wouldn't, because I don't have 2 to 3 hours in my week to go to the grocery store. And so they didn't have any of the help and the extra support like we have. They were just winging it, just trying to get by. And so, unfortunately, us Gen X kids took a lot. We really took on the role of a third parent in a lot of cases. Or if it was a single parent household, we were the second parent, and helped to raise our siblings. And we didn't get trophies for it. We didn't get recognition. It was like, that's what you do. That's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. There rarely was a thank you. I mean, that's just what was expected. And so when we had children, it's the whole cyclical curse of, we always want better for our kids than we had for ourselves, right? And so whoever, the OG Karen was that came up with the participation trophy, or whatever her name was, because I'm sure it was a woman that came up with the participation trophy. My baby's extra special. I want everyone to get a trophy because, I never got trophies when I was a kid. My parents couldn't even afford to put me in softball or gymnastics or whatever. And so it started out maybe as a good thing. But then it just has gotten so far off track that there's this overall sense of entitlement in some of the younger generations that they just think they don't have to work for anything. It's literally going to be handed to them. And I think it, again, was a classic case of something that was a good intention that went horribly wrong somewhere. I don't even know how it went so horribly wrong. But as a recruiter, I coached a lot of Gen Zers and younger millennials on why you need an alarm clock, why you need to set it, why you need to be at your job on time, why you have to go to your job every day if you want to keep your job. Like the coaching sessions that I would have, I would just sit there and shake my head. How am I really having these conversations? And so I just think that we overcompensated as parents to the point where, unfortunately, there are a lot of those snowflake children out there that just think that they're so much more special than everyone else. And I do not count you into that category, but there just are a lot. And I take full weight of responsibility for my generation and my parents' generation in creating that. And I hope that eventually, I would say, I hope it swings back the other way, but I don't know. I mean, things are just, it's interesting to see the nuances from one generation to another, how the lasting repercussions, have these effects. Like, I want my participation trophy for just showing up, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next generation.
And
So
maybe not swing all the way back, but balance out a little bit, right? I mean, because I don't think we
hopefully,
want to go back to the anti-recognition and
yeah,
that kind of thing, but balance out a little bit so that it's not feeling like, if I don't get this, that I'm not successful, right?
right.
We're equating it to something else, and to success, and to all of those types of positive feelings, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and you and I could talk about generations forever. We love generations in the workforce. And so tell us a little bit, if you'd like, about where you see the future of Gen X Nation.
Wow. I have high hopes. The one thing that is recurring that I hear on a regular basis is that Generation X wants community. We want connection. We want community, and we want support and resources. Where the millennials have, what's it called? The Millennial Action Project, is that, or Millennial Action Plan? I get it wrong every time, Matt. They have social groups that can affect major change for millennials, for example. And then you have boomers who have AARP and all these other things, that are in place to help boomers. We have almost nothing for Gen Xers. We're kind of out here on an island by ourselves and being labeled as forgotten and all these other, not so great terms. And so my plans would be my dream for Gen Xers is to create a community that is going to offer comprehensive support and resources for Gen Xers, from everything from careers and finance to family, support to health and wellness, because we just don't have a centralized location to be able to come together as a generation and find these resources that we desperately need. I mean, it's not that we don't need them. We need them. Everybody needs support. Everyone needs community. But Gen Xers, we are independent in not some great ways. I mean, I keep saying to a fault, but we are independent to a fault. I mean, we are very much of the mindset, oh, I can do this myself. I don't need help. Well, everybody needs help, right? Everybody needs help. And so what I would love to see is the community to continue growing, which it's growing at a really great rate, but continuing to grow and to be able to offer comprehensive support and resources to, Generation Xers at scale, because we We desperately need it. And in order to overcome some of these major challenges and obstacles that we're facing, like the fact that, some of us are multi-generational households and, struggling in this last chapter of our career, or I hate saying last chapter, that sounds so final, like the final third of our book of our career. I think that if we don't have that support, that it's going to be a lot more challenging to do it ourselves versus to embrace the help and to embrace a sense of community.
Absolutely. And so before we get to our final question, which everybody knows because I asked everybody the same final question, I want to find out from you, where can people find you or connect with you? What social media platforms are you on? What handles do you have? How can people get to you?
Right. So we have expanded to Facebook, and we have the Facebook group and also the LinkedIn group. So Gen X Nation, and then TikTok, which I'm just learning the technology because, sometimes you got to teach an old dog new tricks, right? So we have a very small presence on there so far. And then also the genxnation.com, where you can learn about the community, learn about the future goals. We do offer consulting services on there, career coaching services, and we have a comprehensive network of Gen Xers that we can bring in to help to educate and to help your business from a Gen X point of view. So those are where we're at right now, and we're growing every day, and I'm excited to see where the future is going to take us.
I'm excited for you too. I can't wait. And I'll drop all those links in the show notes so people can get to them. But leading up to our last question. So Maya Angelou, who's my favorite poet of all time, may she rest in peace. She was wonderful. She had this great quote that says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. People will never forget how you made them feel." And what I'm finding as I'm talking to people is that this is true across the board, right? Whether it's personally or professionally. So can you tell me, have you been in a situation where that quote has sort of rung true for you?
The situation that comes to mind is I was working for a manager. She was also a Gen Xer, and she was new to management, and she was struggling to find her way as a manager, and just, as a person, had a personality that was very difficult to work with. So you partner those two things together, and it was kind of the recipe for disaster, right? And so we hired this team of some of the most talented people that you've ever seen. I mean, very high performers, just people who were ready to just go in there and just kill it every day in our jobs. And she hired us all for this very specific set of skills and talents that we brought to the table, and almost immediately began to just crush our spirit and crush, who we were, crush our individuality, everything that made us different that we brought to the table. She began to just, crush it. I don't even know how else to say it. And we went from being the highest performing group that the company had seen in, I think, 25 years to nothing. I mean, we basically were just miserable as a team. And within about a 1.5 year period of time, they did a complete turnover, I think twice within that department. And it was all because of the manager. I mean, just very not a great person to be around. I mean, I was the person that on the way to work every morning, I would literally get physically sick to my stomach. I just couldn't take it. I mean, Sunday night scaries, that doesn't even begin to convey how myself and my team felt, knowing that we had to go into work the next day. And so once I myself was in a role where I was managing team members, I remembered everything, remembered how she made me feel, how she made my coworkers feel. And they were so just broken and miserable working for a terrible, toxic manager. And so after being in that situation, I ended up managing a very extensive team, and I basically had an open door policy, had open communication, tell me when I suck, tell me what I like, tell me when I'm doing awful, tell me how I can do it better. And working for the worst manager, I think made me such a better leader, because I realized I don't want to be anything like that. So at the time I was miserable and hated the experience, but it ended up being kind of a blessing in the end, because I was in a role later down the road where I, unfortunately, it was very high turnover role just through nature of the business, and I would have to regularly um, terminate employment because of various reasons. And there was one individual that he hugged me and told me thank you when I had to let him go, and I was like, okay, what is happening? And he's like, I know I deserve this. I knew that it was going to happen and it's all my fault. But he said, I just wanted to thank you for fighting for me and doing everything that you could, to help me be better every single day. And, to see individuals succeed in other situations where they may have failed was the best feeling in the world. And so for me, I'm grateful that I had that manager, because it helped shape me into probably a very different leader that I ultimately would have become. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I know I'm far from perfect. My husband would definitely tell you I'm far from perfect, but I do like to think that now I'm hyper aware of, when I work with other people, of how I make them feel and how we work together, whether it's a coworker, and peer, or whether it's in a management type of role. And even just as a contributor, I like to think that I'm much better than I would have been otherwise, not having seen firsthand how just, destructive, bad behavior from management can be in the workplace. So I know it's not warm and fuzzy like you probably wanted, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about how your actions so much affect everyone around you. And if they're negative actions and you have employees who are constantly, going to your superiors and complaining and, filing formal complaints, like, there's some self-reflection that should probably be happening. And hopefully, people as leaders are not, that they're willing to take a look in the mirror when they need to take a look in the mirror. So I think we all should be like that anyway. But
I'm with you on that one. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. It was great to have Sarah with us. And as always, lead with empathy, act with kindness. Have a great day, y'all.
thanks, Elisa.
Thank you for listening to All People Podcast. If you enjoyed our show, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. The work doesn't end here. If you want to keep the conversation going, find me on LinkedIn or Facebook, or visit my website, apeoplepartnerllc.com. Lead with empathy and act with kindness. Have a great day.